I never intended to fall for Alex. Not really. He was younger, handsome in a way that made everyone notice him when he entered a room, but he was my boss, and I was married. I had been married to Mark for almost 30 years, a lifetime of memories, good and bad. We'd raised 2 kids, weathered financial storms, and settled into a comfortable rhythm. Maybe that was the problem. It was comfortable, but it wasn't exciting. At some point, we had stopped seeing each other. Really seeing each other. Alex was different. He was ambitious, passionate about his work, and he noticed me in a way Mark hadn't in years. It started innocently enough. Late nights at the office, collaborating on a big project that had everyone in a frenzy. I was his assistant, after all, though the company's policy that required male executives to have personal assistants always struck me as odd. But the bonuses made it hard to question, and being Alex's right hand felt like a privilege. "Claire, can you stay a bit later tonight? We've got to iron out those reports for the board meeting," Alex had asked one evening. His tone was professional, but there was something about the way he said my name that made me pause. "Of course," I replied, forcing myself to stay calm. There was no reason to feel the way I did, a strange flutter in my chest, like I was 16 again. It was ridiculous. As the evening wore on, the office became quieter. Most of the staff had gone home, leaving only the faint hum of computers and the ticking of the clock on the wall. Alex sat across from me, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened. He looked tired but focused, his attention fixed on the spreadsheets in front of him. "How do you do it, Claire?" he asked suddenly, his voice breaking the silence. I looked up, confused. "Do what?" "Balance it all, work, home, everything. You make it seem effortless." I hesitated, unsure of how to answer. The truth was, I didn't. It wasn't effortless. Every day felt like a balancing act, and most days, I felt like I was failing. But I couldn't admit that to Alex. Not to the man who seemed to have it all together. "I don't know," I said, smiling weakly. "I guess I've just been doing it for so long, it's second nature." He studied me for a moment, his gaze lingering longer than it should have. "You're more than just good at your job, Claire. You're remarkable." There it was. That shift. The moment when our professional relationship crossed a line, however subtle. His compliment felt personal, intimate, and it lingered in the air between us like a secret. I laughed it off, trying to steer the conversation back to work. "Well, someone has to keep you organized," I teased, hoping to lighten the mood. But Alex didn't laugh. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, his eyes still on me. "You do more than that." I felt the air grow thick with unspoken tension. I wasn't sure how to respond, so I did what I always did, I avoided it. "I should probably get going," I said, gathering my things. "Mark's probably waiting for me at home." At the mention of Mark, something flickered in Alex's eyes, but he didn't say anything. He just nodded, the spell between us momentarily broken. But as I left the office that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to stop it. The days that followed were a blur of work and emotions I couldn't quite make sense of. I found myself thinking about Alex more than I should have. His compliments, the way he looked at me, the ease with which we worked together. I tried to push it out of my mind, to focus on Mark and our life together, but it was hard when I felt so invisible at home. One evening, after another long day at the office, I sat across from Mark at the dinner table. The silence between us was deafening. "How was your day?" Mark asked, not looking up from his plate. "Busy," I replied. "We've got that big presentation next week. Alex has had me working late a lot." "Alex." Mark's tone was flat, and I could tell he didn't like the mention of him. "You've been spending a lot of time with him lately." "He's my boss, Mark. It's my job." I didn't mean to sound defensive, but the guilt was creeping in, making every word feel like an accusation. Mark put down his fork, finally looking at me. "I get that. But I feel like you're hardly here anymore, Claire. You're always at work, or if you're home, your mind is somewhere else." I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. He wasn't wrong. I hadn't been present, at least not in the way I should have been. But how could I tell him that? How could I explain that I felt more alive with Alex than I had in years? That I craved something I couldn't name but felt in every stolen glance, every lingering touch? I'm just tired, I said weakly. It's been a lot lately. Mark's eyes softened, but the concern didn't leave his face. You're wearing yourself out. Maybe you need to take a step back. I forced a smile. Maybe, but I knew I wouldn't. Because stepping back meant letting go of whatever it was that had sparked between me and Alex. And I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. A week later, Alex asked me to dinner. It wasn't unusual for us to grab a bite to eat after a long day, but this time felt different. This time, it wasn't just about work. I know this great little place downtown, he said as we wrapped up a meeting. It's quiet, good food. What do you think? I hesitated for a moment, the logical part of my brain screaming at me to say no. But my heart, my traitorous heart, wanted to go. Okay, I said softly, trying to keep my voice steady. Sounds good. Dinner was electric. We talked about everything: work, life, our dreams. Alex listened to me in a way Mark hadn't in years. He made me feel like I mattered, like I was more than just a wife or an assistant. I was Claire again. As the night wore on, the conversation grew more personal, the boundaries between us blurring. By the time we left the restaurant, I knew we had crossed a line. And when Alex walked me to my car, his hand brushed mine, lingering just a little too long. Claire, he said quietly, his voice soft but intense. I can't stop thinking about you. I looked up at him, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to say something, to tell him this was a mistake, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I leaned in, my lips finding his in the dim light of the parking lot. It was a brief kiss, but it was enough. Enough to know that things would never be the same again. It wasn't the kiss that haunted me. It was how easy it was, how natural it felt to fall into Alex's world, like I had been waiting for it all along. After that night, I could no longer pretend that things were just professional. Something had been set in motion, and no matter how much I tried to convince myself otherwise, I was falling deeper. The days blurred together in a haze of secrecy. Work became an excuse, a convenient way to justify the time I spent with Alex. I told Mark I was swamped with projects, that Alex was demanding, but in reality, I wanted to be at the office. It was where I could forget about the life I had with Mark, the quietness that filled our home, the dull ache that came with being unseen. It wasn't just about Alex, though he was part of it. He made me feel alive, yes, but it was more than that. I had spent so many years being what everyone needed me to be: Mark's wife, my children's mother, the reliable assistant at work. But with Alex, I was just Claire. And Claire wanted more than the life she had been living. One evening, after another late night with Alex, I came home to find Mark waiting for me in the living room. His eyes were tired, his mouth a tight line of worry. "Where have you been?" he asked, his voice sharp but not angry, more concerned than anything. I hesitated, my hand still on the doorknob. "At work. I told you we're preparing for the board meeting next week. You said that meeting was next month," Mark replied, his brow furrowing. I swallowed hard, cursing myself for not keeping my lies straight. The timeline moved up. Alex wanted to get ahead of things. Alex. Mark said his name like it left a bad taste in his mouth. He stood, crossing his arms over his chest as he studied me. "It seems like everything is about him these days." I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. What could I say? He wasn't wrong. Everything had become about Alex, whether I wanted to admit it or not. Instead, I did what I had been doing for weeks. I avoided the confrontation. "I'm just tired, Mark," I said quietly, hoping my voice didn't betray the guilt that was eating away at me. "I need a shower." "Claire," he called after me, his voice softer now. "I miss you. I feel like you're slipping away from me." I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. If I looked at him, I might break. "I'm still here," I whispered, more to myself than to him, before walking upstairs. But the truth was, I wasn't. Not really. At work, things with Alex grew more intense. We didn't talk about what happened in the parking lot, but the unspoken tension between us was undeniable. Every time he looked at me, touched my hand, or leaned in a little too close, I felt the pull. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't stop myself. One night, after another long day, he asked me to stay late again. This time, it wasn't just about work. I could feel it. "Do you want to get out of here?" Alex asked, his voice low, as we sat in his office, the room dimly lit by the desk lamp. His eyes lingered on mine, and I could see the question in them, more than just a suggestion for drinks. He was offering me something more, something I had been craving. I hesitated, the logical part of me screaming that this was the moment to walk away, to salvage whatever was left of my marriage. But I couldn't. I didn't want to. "Where?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He smiled, that familiar spark of confidence in his eyes. "My place. It's quiet. We can talk." We both knew talking wasn't what he had in mind. Before I could think about it any longer, I nodded, sealing my fate. Alex's apartment was modern and sleek, much like him. It was the kind of place that felt temporary, like he was always ready to move on to something new. As I stood in his living room, the weight of what I was doing settled over me like a heavy blanket. But instead of turning back, I let him lead me deeper into his world. He poured me a glass of wine, his fingers brushing mine as he handed it to me. I sat down on the couch, trying to act casual, but the tension between us was palpable. "Claire," he said, sitting next to me, his voice soft. "You know we don't have to pretend anymore." I looked at him, my heart racing. "Pretend? That this is just about work?" he continued, his eyes locked on mine. "We both know it's more than that." I bit my lip, trying to find the right words, but none came. He was right. It had been more than work for a while now. I had just been too afraid to admit it. "I don't know what I'm doing," I finally confessed, my voice trembling. "I've been married to Mark for so long. I don't even know how to be anything else." "You don't have to be anything else," Alex said, his voice gentle as he moved closer. "Not with me. You can just be," and in that moment, I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that I could be someone else, someone who wasn't tied down by a marriage that had long since lost its spark. So when he leaned in and kissed me, I didn't pull away. Days turned into weeks, and soon, I was living two lives. At work, I was Claire, the competent assistant, the woman who had it all together. But with Alex, I was something else entirely. I was the woman he desired, the one he saw. But at home, things were falling apart. Mark had grown distant, his suspicions growing with every late night, every flimsy excuse. I could feel him watching me, trying to figure out where I had gone, but I couldn't bring myself to tell him. I wasn't ready to admit what I had become. One night, Mark confronted me again. I had come home late, the scent of Alex's cologne still clinging to my clothes. "Who is he?" Mark asked, his voice cold and steady as I stepped into the living room. I froze, my heart sinking. "What are you talking about? You think I'm blind?" Mark's voice rose, frustration finally breaking through. "You think I haven't noticed the way you've been acting? The late nights? The phone calls? You're different, Claire. You're not here anymore." I swallowed hard, my hands trembling. "It's just work, Mark. Work doesn't make you stop wearing your wedding ring." He shot back, his eyes flashing with hurt. "Work doesn't make you disappear every night." I instinctively reached for my left hand, where my wedding ring should have been, but it wasn't there. I hadn't worn it in weeks, and the absence of it now felt like a betrayal in itself. I don't know what you want me to say," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I want the truth," Mark said, his voice breaking slightly. "Do you even love me anymore?" I couldn't answer him. I didn't know. And that silence, my silence, was answer enough. Mark's face crumpled, and he turned away, leaving me standing alone in the middle of the room, unsure of who I had become. The silence in the house felt heavier than it had before, like a thick fog that made it difficult to breathe. Mark and I were two strangers cohabitating in a space that had once felt like home. Every night, I lay in bed beside him, pretending to be asleep while my mind was consumed with thoughts of Alex. I could feel the weight of our unspoken words pressing down on us, and I knew the truth was lurking just beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. Over the next few days, Mark's demeanor shifted. He became quieter, more introspective. I could see him retreating into himself, and the guilt gnawed at me. I wanted to reach out, to explain, to tell him that it wasn't just about him, it was about me, too. But every time I opened my mouth, the words got stuck in my throat. It was easier to ignore the truth than to face it head on. One Friday evening, I returned home late from another dinner with Alex. The scent of his cologne still lingered on my clothes, and I felt a mix of exhilaration and guilt. I walked into the living room, only to find Mark sitting on the couch, a small black device in his hand. "What's that?" I asked, my heart racing as I approached him. He looked up, his expression unreadable. "Just something I've been working on." I peered closer, and my stomach dropped. It was an audio recorder. A realization washed over me, the very device he could use to expose my betrayal. Panic coursed through my veins. "Mark, it's not what you think," I started, my voice trembling. "I can explain." "Can you?" he asked, cutting me off. "Can you really explain why you've been lying to me, Claire? Why you're never home?" I opened my mouth to argue, but the truth hung heavy in the air between us. I had been lying, not just to him but to myself. "I was just trying to keep up with work. You know how demanding it can be," I said, but my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. Mark shook his head, a mix of disappointment and anger flashing in his eyes. "That's not all it is, and you know it. I've seen the way you look at him, the way you talk about him. You're not fooling anyone." I took a step back, feeling trapped. "Mark, please don't do this. I never wanted to hurt you." "Then why do you keep hurting me?" he shot back, his voice rising in frustration. "I've been patient, Claire. I've tried to understand, but this is beyond what I can handle." I wanted to scream, to cry, to do anything to make him understand. "I'm still here. I'm still your wife," I pleaded, desperate for him to see that beneath all the mistakes and the pain, I was still the same person he had married. "Are you?" Mark challenged, his voice low and cold. "You're just a shadow of the woman I married. What happened to you?" The accusation stung, and I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice breaking. "I feel lost, Mark. I feel like I'm suffocating." He set the recorder down on the coffee table, and I flinched at the sound. "Then maybe you need to figure things out, because I can't keep living like this. I deserve better." A wave of despair washed over me. "Mark, don't say that. We can work through this. I promise." "Can we?" he countered, his eyes narrowing. "Because it doesn't feel like it. And you know what? I found something else while I was trying to figure this out." My heart sank. "What do you mean?" Mark reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, familiar item. It was my wedding ring, the one I hadn't worn in weeks. He held it up, the light glinting off the metal, a stark reminder of everything we once had. "I found it on your dresser," he said, his voice trembling with barely contained emotion. "You've stopped wearing it, Claire. What does that tell me?" I felt the ground shift beneath me as shame engulfed me. "It was just a mistake. I forgot to put it on," I lied, but the words felt hollow. "A mistake?" Mark repeated, incredulity written all over his face. "A mistake? You've forgotten to wear your wedding ring more times than I can count. How many mistakes have you made with him?" "Stop it!" I shouted, the truth finally boiling over. "Stop acting like you're the victim here. You haven't seen me in years. I've been fighting to keep this family together while you've been lost in your own world." "I've been lost?" Mark laughed bitterly, the sound echoing in the empty room. "I've been here, Claire. I've been right here, waiting for you to see me. But you've made your choice." A silence settled between us, heavy and suffocating. I felt the walls closing in, trapping me in my web of lies. I wanted to reach out to him, to bridge the chasm that had formed between us, but I couldn't. I had dug my own grave, and now I was trapped in it. The next few days were a blur. Mark and I barely spoke, and when we did, it was through gritted teeth, each conversation laced with accusation and hurt. I could feel the tension crackling in the air, and every moment spent together felt like a ticking time bomb, ready to explode at any second. I spent more time at the office with Alex, seeking solace in his presence, but even that felt tainted. Each stolen moment became overshadowed by the growing guilt I carried. I wanted to talk to Alex about everything, how I felt trapped and suffocated at home. But even with him, I felt the weight of my choices. It was becoming increasingly clear that my decisions were tearing everything apart. One night, as I sat at my desk finishing up some reports, Alex walked in, a concerned look etched on his face. "You look exhausted," he said softly, leaning against the doorframe. "What's going on?" I tried to force a smile, but it fell flat. "Just a lot on my plate. You've been distant lately. Is everything okay with Mark?" he pressed, his voice laced with concern. I hesitated, biting my lip. "Not really. He found out I'd been lying to him, and things are tense." Alex's expression shifted, a mixture of sympathy and frustration. "You know this can't continue, right? You're playing with fire." "I know," I admitted, feeling a wave of shame wash over me. "But it's hard to let go. I feel alive when I'm with you, and I don't want to lose that." "But at what cost, Claire?" he asked, his tone softening. "You have a family. You can't just walk away from that." I felt the lump in my throat grow as I thought about my life, my marriage, and the mess I had made. "I don't know how to fix it," I confessed, tears welling in my eyes. "I feel trapped." Alex stepped closer, his expression turning serious. "Then you need to figure out what you want. Because this can't go on. You deserve happiness, but so does Mark." I looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "I wish it were that simple, but it isn't. You need to decide who you want to be, Claire. Because right now you're living in two worlds, and eventually, one will come crashing down." As his words sunk in, I felt the weight of my choices pressing down on me. I wanted to be brave enough to choose happiness, but I also didn't want to hurt the people I cared about. The spiraling chaos of my life left me breathless, and I knew that soon I would have to face the consequences of everything I had done. Days later, Mark confronted me again. He stood in front of me, his expression unreadable, and I felt my heart race with anxiety. "Claire, I've been thinking," he said, his voice steady. "About us, about what we need to do." I held my breath, waiting for him to continue. "What do you mean?" I asked, my stomach twisting. "I think we need to have a serious talk," he said, his tone shifting. "About the future. About whether we can fix this or if it's time to let go." Tears streamed down my cheeks, and I shook my head. "Mark, please don't say that. We can work through this." "But can we?" he countered, his voice thick with emotion. "You've made your choice, Claire. And it's clear where your heart lies." And just like that, the dam broke. I could no longer pretend everything was okay. I was caught in a web of my own making, and the truth was finally coming to light. The days that followed felt like I was standing on a precipice, teetering between two worlds: the comfortable familiarity of my life with Mark and the intoxicating allure of the unknown with Alex. But with each passing moment, it became increasingly clear that I couldn't remain suspended in this limbo forever. Something had to give, and I feared it would be everything. I woke up one morning to find Mark already gone, leaving behind only the lingering chill of his absence. The house felt hollow, echoing with memories that were rapidly becoming ghosts. I stood in the kitchen, staring at my reflection in the darkened window, and I barely recognized the woman looking back at me. The woman who had once been so sure of her life and her choices now felt lost, adrift in a sea of her own making. That evening, I returned home late from the office. My heart raced as I walked through the front door, half expecting Mark to be waiting for me with that look of disappointment etched across his face. Instead, the house was silent. I sighed, grateful for the momentary reprieve, but I knew it wouldn't last long. As I made my way to the living room, my phone buzzed with a message from Alex. "Can we talk?" The words sent a shiver of excitement down my spine, but alongside it, a pang of guilt knotted in my stomach. I quickly typed a response. "Yes, can I come over?" A moment later, his reply came. "Of course. I'll be waiting." I made the decision before I even thought it through. I needed to see him, to feel the rush of being in his presence, if only for a moment. I grabbed my keys and headed out, the weight of the house pulling me down as I left. When I arrived at Alex's apartment, he greeted me with a warm smile, his arms open wide as he pulled me into a tight embrace. You look like you've been through a storm, he said, stepping back to study me. I have, I admitted, forcing a smile as I pushed the door shut behind me. It's complicated. Complicated usually means messy, he said, guiding me to the couch where we sat close, the air thick with unsaid words. I can't keep living like this, Alex, I confessed, my voice trembling. I feel like I'm betraying Mark every second I'm here with you. Alex's brow furrowed, and he took my hands in his. Then why are you here? Because I need to be, I replied, almost defensively. You make me feel alive in a way that I haven't felt in years. With you, it's like I can breathe again. He searched my eyes, a mixture of concern and desire swirling in his expression. But what about Mark? He's your husband. This isn't just a fling. You need to be honest with him, Claire. I pulled my hands away, suddenly angry. You don't understand. It's not that simple. I don't know how to be honest anymore. I don't even know who I am. Alex leaned back, exhaling slowly. I want you to be happy, Claire. But you need to figure out what that means for you. You can't keep playing both sides. As I drove home later that night, my thoughts churned in a chaotic whirlpool. I had escaped Mark's world for a few hours, but I was returning to the same stark reality, a reality I had built for myself. I parked in the driveway and took a deep breath, mentally preparing for another confrontation. When I stepped inside, Mark was waiting for me, arms crossed and a look of resolve on his face. We need to talk, he said, his voice steady. I felt my heart race. About what? About everything, he replied, motioning for me to sit on the couch. I can't keep pretending like everything's okay when I know it's not. You've been distant for months, and I'm not blind to what's going on. I swallowed hard, the walls closing in around me. Mark, save it, he interrupted, his voice firm. I found your old wedding ring in the bottom of a drawer. You've stopped wearing it, and I think I know why. Panic surged through me, and I felt the color drain from my face. Mark, please, you're seeing someone else, he said, his tone flat, devoid of anger but filled with an unmistakable hurt. I need you to tell me the truth. Is it Alex? My silence was the loudest answer I could have given. Damn it, Claire! Mark's voice cracked, a mix of rage and pain breaking through. How long? How long have you been lying to me? It's not just about him, Mark, I pleaded, desperate to explain. I've been lost for so long. I didn't mean for this to happen, but it did, he said, his voice rising. You've made your choice. And now you need to own it. I felt tears spring to my eyes as the weight of my actions crashed over me. I didn't want to hurt you. I never wanted to hurt you. Mark stood up, running a hand through his hair as he paced the room. You say that, but your actions tell a different story. You're choosing someone else over me. I'm trying to figure out what I want, I said, my voice breaking. I don't want to lose you, but I don't want to live a lie either. Then maybe you need to choose, he said, stopping to face me, his eyes fierce. Because I can't keep doing this. I deserve to know if you want to fight for this marriage or if you've already made up your mind. I was silent, the weight of his words pressing down on me. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into the abyss below. I don't know, I whispered, my voice barely audible. I wish I did. Mark turned away, his shoulders sagging as the realization of what I had done settled in. Then maybe it's time for both of us to take a step back. I can't keep fighting for a marriage where you're not all in. I felt a deep sense of despair wash over me. Mark, please don't say that. It's the truth, Claire, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I love you, but I won't be second to anyone. Not to him. Not to anyone. And just like that, the dam broke, the foundation of our life together crumbling into dust. The fight had left him, and now it was clear. We were both spiraling toward a future I wasn't ready to face. In the days that followed, the house became a battleground of unspoken words and avoided gazes. Every moment felt heavy, filled with a tension that neither of us knew how to address. I spent more time at work, using it as an escape from the chaos that had become my life. But with each late night, I felt the ache of loneliness deepening. Alex texted me often, concern woven through his messages. Have you talked to Mark? I'm here if you need to talk. But the truth was, I couldn't talk to him about this. Not yet. I was still trying to process the magnitude of my choices and the reality of what was unraveling. On one particularly tense evening, I returned home to find Mark sitting at the dining table, his face drawn and tired. He looked up as I walked in, and for a moment the silence between us felt like a chasm that could never be crossed. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice quieter now, as if he was afraid to break the fragile peace. I nodded, unsure of what to say. "I've been thinking," he began, his gaze fixed on the table. "Maybe we should consider separation." My heart plummeted. "Separation?" I echoed, my voice trembling. "It might be the only way for us to figure things out," he said, finally meeting my eyes. "We need time apart to really see what we want. I can't keep living like this." I shook my head, tears spilling down my cheeks. "But I don't want that, Mark. I want to fix this." "Then show me," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "You need to be honest with yourself first. I can't fight for us alone." And in that moment, I realized the truth. I had been so consumed by my desires and confusion that I had neglected the one person who had always been there for me. I took a deep breath, the weight of my choices bearing down on me. "I'll talk to Alex," I said finally, my voice steadying. "I need to end things. I don't want to hurt you anymore." Mark's expression softened, relief flooding his features. "I just want you to be happy, Claire. I want you to find yourself again." As I stood there, the reality of my choices began to take shape. I was on the brink of losing everything I had ever known. But perhaps, in letting go, I could find a path to reclaiming the woman I once was. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, grappling with the monumental decision I had just made. The stars outside twinkled in the darkness, but inside, my heart felt heavy. I knew the road ahead would be painful, but I also